Hello Urites and welcome back to Mathematics. In today's lesson we're continuing with our topic of fractions, decimals and percentages, and what we're going to be talking about is a thing called percentage changes. So what we want to be able to do by the end of this lesson, today's learning intention is to calculate percentage changes, and by the end of the lesson we want to be able to calculate a percentage profit and a percentage loss and solve word problems involving percentage change. So let's have a look at these questions. So firstly, what we're going to be talking about is just two quick definitions I kind of introduced to you earlier in this topic. So the first one is a profit. Now a profit is when you sell something and the selling price is of an item. So selling price of an item is higher than its cost price. So we're imagining, let's say we're imagining a company and it costs them a certain amount of money to make an item. If they sell the item at a higher price, they make a profit. So here, this is where the amount that you sell something for is more than the amount that it cost you. So the way that we calculate this is we take the profit is equal to our selling price, and we subtract our cost price. So how much it cost us to make the item. So that's how we find a profit. The second thing that we need to know is what a loss is. Now a loss is when you need to sell something for less than the cost price. And so here, this is when the cost price of an item is higher than the selling price. And so here, the formula we're going to use for a loss is, instead of doing the selling minus the cost, we're doing the other way around. So the cost price, and we're subtracting the selling. We'll do that in green so it matches. Selling price. So we're imagining here that someone needs to sell off an item really quickly, and so they have to sell it at a little bit cheaper, and sometimes you might make a loss on an item. So what we'll be actually looking at in this lesson is how to actually calculate these amounts, not just as dollar amounts, but actually as a percentage of your original item's cost. And so, for example, you might hear that, oh, we made a 20% profit. So that means that you sold your item for 20% higher than the cost price. Or we made a 20% loss. You had to sell your item at 20% lower than the original cost price. So that's what we're going to be looking at in today's lesson. So let's have a look at this first part. So when we're calculating percentage change. So these are the steps that we're going to be doing when we're doing a percentage change. And this is the same for both parts of today's lesson. So first step is we want to calculate the change amount. So we want to use one of those two formulas. We want to subtract the two amounts. So firstly, calculate the change amount. Then the second step is this thing that we actually did in a previous lesson, is an operation that we've done before. So this is when we write the change amount as a percentage of the original. So here, just as a quick recap, when we wanted to find a quantity as a percentage of another, what we had to do was we checked that both the quantities were the same units, and in most of these cases they are, so this step isn't going to be too different, unless you're dealing with cents, in which case you need to actually change them both into the same unit. Then we write it as a fraction with the part in the numerator and the whole in the denominator. So what we want to do here is we're going to write the change amount. So here, for this step, we're going to write the change amount over the original cost. So over the original amount. And then we convert it to a percentage. So the way that we do that is we multiply by 100%. So this is actually a few steps that we've done before earlier in this topic. So when we're applying it into this percentage change, all we are doing is we first want to calculate the change amount. So just like we did here, just as we have up here, calculate the change amount by subtracting the two amounts and then write it as a percentage. Okay, so let's have a look at these examples. Calculating percentage change. So here, what I have is an example of this. Calculate the percentage change, profit or loss, when. And so in these scenarios, what we're going to do is figure out if it's firstly a profit or a loss, and then calculate the percentage profit or loss. So let's have a look at the first one. So if $25 became $32, well, you're starting off with $25 and then suddenly becomes $32. Have we made a profit or have we made a loss? Well, in this case, because let's just imagine that the original is our cost price and the final is our selling price. Because we're selling it at a higher price than the cost price, that means we've made a profit. So this is an example of a profit. So all we need to do here is we're going to calculate the profit amount. So the profit is just going to be $32 minus $25. So usually for this step, I just recommend you take the higher number and you subtract the lower number. That just gives you $7. Okay. Now that we've done that, we want to write this as a percentage change. So we want to write this as a percentage profit. So the way that we do this is we take our $7 here and we write it as a fraction, 7 over the original amount. Now the original, we started off with $25. So here for the original, I'm just going to write $25. And I'm going to convert this to a percentage. The way that I do this, I multiply this whole thing by 100 and we chuck the percent symbol at the end. Now when we're doing this, we don't want to put this in our calculator if we have to, but we can just chuck this straight into a calculator if we want. So let me go through this. So I've got 7 over 25 times it by 100. And so here we get 28%. So that's how we calculate a percentage of profit or loss. So here, let's just summarize it. This is a 28% profit. Okay. So the way we did this, the first step that we did was we calculated the change. And so here we identified that it was a profit, and then we subtracted the two values. Then we wrote it as a fraction over the original amount. So the second step is over here. So this is step 1. And step 2, we wrote it as a fraction over the original and we multiplied it by 100%. So we can convert it to a percentage. And then as final part, we just wrote that it was a percentage profit. Okay, let's have a look at the next example. Here, I've got $60 becomes $48. So let's imagine that we started off selling some, it cost us $60 to produce something and we sell it at $48. Well, in this scenario, this is an example of a loss because if you notice, the cost price is higher than my selling price. So my cost is higher than my selling price. And so here, this is a loss. And I'm just going to go, well, with a loss, with all of these profits or losses, I recommend you just take, the easiest way is just to do your bigger number minus your smaller number. So here you get 60 minus 48, which gives you $12. Okay. So that is the loss amount. I have $12 lost. Then I'm going to write this as a percentage of the original. So here I'm just going to write this as a fraction. 12 over $60. That was the original amount. So 60 was what I started off with. And I times it by 100%. So here let's chuck this in the calculator. 12 over 60 times by 100. So here you get 20%. Now you can also do this by hand. You could simplify a fraction first off. And here I get, actually you could go 60 and 100 is a common factor. They both have a common factor of 20. So here I would take 3 and 5. And then I can simplify my fraction. 3 goes into 12 4 times and just multiply these two numbers. So I get 20. You could do this without a calculator as well. But let's just summarize this at the end. It's a 20% loss. So that's how we can calculate a percentage change. Kind of like two steps. Firstly, we want to figure out what the change amount is. So we want to calculate the profit or the loss. So we take the cost amount and we subtract it by the selling price for this example where it was a loss. And we take the selling amount and subtract it by the cost for our profit. Then we write that as a percentage of the original. So we take that amount that we changed, the change amount, and we put that as a fraction over the original. And then we convert it to a percentage by timesing by 100. So that's how we calculate a percentage change. What we're going to also do is apply this in a worded problems. Now the way we're going to do this is we're going to apply a technique that can be used, a skill that can be used in all worded problems in mathematics and also in other subjects, I guess, as well. So this is Newman's error analysis, and I think we've gone through it a few times before in class. I'm not sure, don't remember, but let's just go through the steps of Newman's error analysis. So step 1, what we want to do is we want to read the question carefully. If you don't read the question carefully, you're not going to know what you're going to be answering. The second thing is then we also, as we are reading, we want to underline a few keywords. What information is important to help us understand and answer the question? Additionally, this is not going to be super relevant for this particular topic, but just in general, my additional hint is if you need to draw any diagrams that might help you visualize the question, I recommend you also draw those diagrams as well. Okay, the second step is then to identify what the question is asking you to do. The way I also like to do this is I use a separate highlighter or I circle what I need to do in my question. So identify what the question is asking you to do. Then the third step is to figure out what operations and formulas are we going to use. For these questions, we're going to need to use a percentage change. So we need to subtract, and we also need to multiply. And we also need to subtract, divide, because we're using a fraction, and then we're also going to need to multiply. Then the third step is then we're going to need to solve the question. So we solve the question, and then the final bit is just check your answer. If it looks wrong, it probably is wrong. So let's apply Newman's errors analysis in the following question. So let's have a look. Example 2. Ross buys a ticket for a concert for $125, but is later unable to go. He sells it to his friend for $75. Did he make a profit or loss? What is the percentage profit or loss he made? So we've read through the question. I'm just going to read it again so that we're able to do it, able to pay attention to a few key words. And as we go in and read this second time, we're just going to underline a few key words as well. So Ross buys a ticket to a concert for $125. Now in this question, in this first sentence, I'm going to underline two things. Firstly, it's $125. Oh, actually, didn't even finish reading the question, but he's later unable to go. I'm going to underline this $125. Okay, that's really important because that's a numerical amount that I'm going to be working with. Now the second part I'm also going to underline is he's buying this ticket. It's important that he's the one that's buying it as opposed to he's selling a ticket to begin with. So here, Ross buys it for $125. Let's have a look at the next sentence. He sells it to his friend for $75. Well, the important part here is he sells it for $75. The $75, numerical amount, that's going to be important for me. But it's also the fact that he's selling it. He's selling it. That's what tells me this $75 refers to. Okay, the next two parts is the question. So I'm going to actually use a separate color for this. If you have separate colors, it's helpful. If not, you can actually underline or circle it. So I'm going to use a different type of underline or circle it. I can also put it in the box. Now, this next part is, did he make a profit or loss? So we want to check first of all if he made a profit or a loss. So we have a look at those numbers and we check if it's a profit or loss. Then the next part, and the next question is, what is the percentage profit or loss? We want to find the percentage profit or loss that was made. So let's think about this. First of all, profit or loss. What operations do we need to use to answer this one? Well, we need to use our subtraction to figure out, and also just looking at the numbers to see which one is bigger than or smaller. And that'll help me to answer this part here. Now this part, this arrow is in green, you don't need to actually write these. These are just so that what you should be thinking in your head as you do this part. Now there's another part was the percentage profit or loss that he made. Now when you're doing this, well, if you remember, when we're calculating a percentage profit or calculating a percentage, what we needed to do was we need to write it as a fraction of the original. So here, that's division, to write it as a fraction of the original, and then we also needed to convert it by multiplying. So I'm multiplying. So let's go about and do all of this. Now let's start off. Let's have a look. So we want to check if it's a profit or loss. That's the first question. Now have a look here. Ross buys a ticket for $125 and he sells it for $75. Now if he bought it for $125 and he sells it for $75, he sold it for lower than he bought it for. So that means he's made a loss. So here, I'm going to write here loss. And we're just going to calculate that loss amount. So here, 125 minus 75. That just gives me $50. So it was a loss of $50. Okay, so he's made a loss. Second part is we want to find that percentage loss. So here, I'm just going to write here. So percentage loss is going to be equal to, now what we did earlier was we wrote it, our loss as a fraction of the original. So here I'm going to have $50 over the original amount. How much did he buy the ticket for? He bought it for $125, and then we're going to convert it to a percentage. So we're going to times it by 100%. Okay, let's chuck this in the calculator. So here it's 50 over 125 times it by 100. So we get 40%. So here, loss of $50, which is 40% loss. So there we go. That's how we can answer these questions. So here, when you're reading through the question, read through it very carefully. And then after you've done that, underline a few keywords. Underline the keywords that'll help you answer the question. Have a look at what the question is actually asking you to do. Then figure out what operations you'll need to use to solve the question, and then just go and solve it. Now, final thing that we need to do is figure out if this is a fair answer. Now, here I got that it was a 40% loss. Is it fair that Ross made a 40% loss? Well, if you have a look at those numbers, well, 40 is kind of close to, when I like to think of this, I like to think of like a few kind of key percentages. For example, 40 is fairly close to 50%. Now, 50% is just half of the amount. So if you have a look at these two numbers, well, half of 125, that's like around $62, 60 something dollars. So if the number is just a little bit above $60, we know that we're in the right ballpark, because 40%, that's just a little bit less than 50%. And so that means that when we have a 40% loss, they're just a little bit above that 50% mark. So here, $75 is roughly at the right spot. So that gives me a good idea, good kind of like idea in my mind of like, hey, we might be in the right spot here. Okay, so that's it for today's lesson. Let's just quickly do a quick recap of what we did in today's lesson. In today's lesson, we were talking about percentage change. And so we talked about the ideas of profit and loss. Profits are when you sell something for a higher price than it costs you, and a loss is the other way around, where it costs you a lot more than it is to sell. And then from there, what we are able to do was calculate whether or not the change amount as a percentage. So the way we did this was we found the change by subtracting our cost and our selling price and figuring out if it's a percentage of profit or a loss. And then from there, we wrote it as a percentage of the original. So here we went through a way to do that. If you're not sure how to do these steps, have a look at these, particularly writing quantity as a percentage of another. Have a look at our older lessons where we actually went through this, and hopefully that will be able to help you out. In the second part of today's lesson, we looked at solving some worded problems, and so we used Newman's error analysis to help me underline the keywords in my question, identify what was the question asking me to do, identify some operations I needed to use to solving it, and then checking my answer. So that's it for today's lesson. Hopefully that helped you, right? And if there's any question, as always, feel free to message me or send me an email, and I'm more than happy to try and answer you. But I hope you're staying safe wherever you are, and until next, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.